The snow was falling sideways. Claire Harlan pressed her cheek against the frozen stock of her rifle and watched the muzzle flash bloom in the darkness 300 meters below. Then another, then a third. The enemy had flanked them to the exact approach she had flagged 6 hours ago. The disturbed snow line on the northern ridge that Master Chief Calloway had dismissed with a single shake of his head. Now Jack Rohr was bleeding from a through and through in his left thigh. Now their comms were degraded to static and fragments. Now 5 of the most lethal snipers in the United States military were pinned inside a dead-end stone corridor with 17 rounds between them and a hostile force that knew exactly where they were. Claire exhaled. The breath crystallized and vanished. Somewhere behind her, Cole Vance was trying to raise a QRF on a radio that had been cutting out since they crossed the ridgeline. Miles Grant had his back against the frozen masonry, swapping a half-empty magazine for his last full one. Alex Mercer was applying pressure to Rohr's wound with both hands, his face tight and pale in the moonlight. And Calloway, Master Chief Ryan Calloway, 23 years in the teams, 4 combat deployments, the kind of man whose silence could break a recruit faster than any insult, was staring at the collapsed stone wall behind him like he was trying to will it into a door. It wasn't going to become a door. Claire knew that. She also knew something Calloway didn't. Walls were never solid. Walls were just problems that hadn't been solved yet. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 14 months earlier, Claire Harlan walked onto a military training facility she had never seen before and would never be able to name afterward. The location was classified. The program was classified. The men waiting for her on the gravel lot were not classified. They were simply the best snipers the SEAL teams had ever produced, and they looked at her like she was a misprint on an order sheet. She was used to that look. She had earned her place through the same pipeline as any of them, Bud/S, SQT, Sniper School, Advanced Reconnaissance Training. Her course record was clean. Her shooting scores were in the top 3%. Her psychological evaluation noted exceptional stress tolerance and unusually developed spatial awareness. None of that mattered in the first 5 seconds. What mattered was that she was 5'7", 138 pounds, and possessed a pair of chromosomes that had never walked through this particular gate before. Master Chief Ryan Calloway was the first to speak. He was a compact man, deep-set eyes, gray threading through a close-cropped beard. His voice was flat and unhurried, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed without repetition. Harlan, Master Chief, you know why you're here? Element integration, 6-month attachment, combat evaluation. Calloway nodded once. You know what we do? Precision direct action, long-range interdiction, reconnaissance and target development. You know what we don't do? Claire said nothing. She had been in the military long enough to recognize a trap question. Calloway let the silence stretch for 4 full seconds. We don't make exceptions. We don't lower standards. We don't explain ourselves twice. You perform or you leave. That's the bar. Understood. Good. He turned and walked toward the low concrete building at the edge of the lot. Vance will show you your rack. 06 briefing tomorrow. Don't be late. Cole Vance was waiting by the door. He was younger than Calloway, maybe 32, with the kind of easy athleticism that suggested he had never had to work particularly hard at anything physical in his life. He looked at Claire the same way the others had. Not hostile, exactly, but watchful, measuring. Harlan, Vance, you're with me on the range. I spot you shoot. Copy. He handed her a key card. Racks in Building 3, 2nd floor. Chow's at 1800. Don't expect conversation. Claire took the key card. I don't. Vance almost smiled. Almost. Good, because you're not getting any. The first test came within 72 hours. Claire had spent the intervening time learning the facility's rhythm. The pre-dawn PT sessions on the beach, the classroom blocks on ballistic coefficients and wind modeling, the endless hours on the flat ranges dialing in cold bore consistency. She had kept her head down, her mouth shut, and her groupings tight. She had eaten alone, slept alone, and trained alone whenever the schedule permitted. She had also noticed the small things. The way Miles Grant would fall silent whenever she approached the armory. The way Alex Mercer would find somewhere else to look when she passed him in the corridor. The way the team's crude humor, the profane, stress-burning banter that every sniper element relied on, would simply stop the moment she entered a room. They weren't hostile. They were careful. And careful, in a unit like this, was almost worse. The test came on a crosswind lane overlooking the Pacific. The wind was blowing 8 to 12 miles per hour from the southwest, shifting every 40 seconds as the thermals off the water fought with the cooler air rolling down from the hills. Claire had drawn the worst position on the line, a shallow depression with no natural windbreak, 20 yards below the optimal firing point that Grant had claimed without comment. She didn't complain. She set up her rifle, extended the bipod legs, and settled into position. That was when she noticed the spring clip was missing. The bipod spring clip was a small piece of machined steel, maybe 2 inches long, designed to lock the legs in place under recoil. Without it, the legs would collapse on the first shot, dropping the muzzle into the dirt and destroying any chance of follow-up. Claire ran her fingers along the bipod housing. The clip hadn't fallen out. The retention groove was clean, undamaged. Someone had removed it deliberately. She had 2 choices. She could raise the issue, demand a replacement, and confirm every suspicion the team already held about women in combat roles, that they needed special treatment, that they couldn't adapt, that they would complain when conditions weren't perfect. Or she could solve the problem. Claire reached into her kit and pulled out a roll of rigger's tape. She wrapped the bipod legs twice, cinching the tape tight enough to hold against recoil, but loose enough to adjust elevation. It wasn't elegant. It would hold. She fired 23 rounds that afternoon. 22 of them landed within a 4-inch circle at 800 yards. The 23rd caught a gust and drifted 6 inches right. Still a kill shot. Still clean. Still better than anyone else on the line except Calloway himself. No one said anything. No one had to. The second test came a week later, during a night shoot on the coastal bluffs. Claire had drawn the midnight to 4 shift with Vance as her spotter. The targets were steel silhouettes positioned at irregular intervals between 600 and 1100 yards, illuminated only by a 3/4 moon that kept ducking behind high clouds. The wind was inconsistent. Full value at the top of the bluff, quartering at the midpoint, dead calm in the draws where the targets were placed. Vance handed her the range card without looking at her. Data's from the afternoon session. Wind should be similar. Claire took the card and studied it. Something was wrong. The wind profile listed the baseline at 6 to 8 miles per hour from the west. But the grass on the bluff was bending northeast, which meant the wind had shifted since the afternoon readings were taken. More than that, the mirage through her scope was boiling left. Not right. The data card was either outdated or deliberately mislabeled. She looked at Vance. His face was unreadable in the darkness. Winds shifted, she said quietly. Card's wrong. Card's what I gave you. Claire nodded once. She understood. She spent the next 4 hours rereading every shot from scratch. No range card. No pre-calculated holds. Just her scope, her reticle, and the micro movements of grass and snow and suspended dust that told her where the wind was and what it was doing. She hit 14 of 15 targets. The miss was a cold bore shot on a partial silhouette at 1040. Close enough to ring the edge of the steel, but not center enough to count. When she came off the line at 0400, Calloway was waiting in the shadows. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the score sheet, looked at her, and walked away. The next morning, her range card was accurate. The third test was the one that should have broken her. It was a 3-day field exercise in the Scrubland Hills east of the facility. The objective was simple. Establish a hide, maintain observation on a mock target compound, and engage designated targets of opportunity over a 72-hour window. Each shooter would be evaluated on concealment, patience, shot accuracy, and extraction without compromise. Claire was assigned a position on a rocky slope overlooking the compound's southern approach. The hide site was marginal at best. Sparse vegetation, limited shade, and a direct sight line to the observation tower that the instructors were using to spot student positions. Anyone who wasn't perfect would be detected. Anyone detected would fail. She built her hide in 4 hours, working in absolute silence under a moonless sky. She cut dead grass from a gully 200 meters away and wove it into a mat that matched the slope's natural texture. She excavated a shallow depression for her body, packing the displaced soil into sandbags that she positioned as a rear berm. She ran her rifle's barrel through a tube of burlap, treated with scent-eliminating compound, and mounted the bipod on a tripod she had assembled from stripped branches and paracord. By dawn, she was invisible. The problem wasn't the hide. The problem was the rangefinder. She powered it up at first light to take initial readings on the target compound. The display flickered, dimmed, and died. She checked the battery compartment. The batteries were in place. But when she removed them, she found they were nearly depleted. Someone had swapped her fresh batteries for ones that were already dying. Claire closed her eyes. She had a decision to make. She could call for resupply, admit the equipment failure, and accept a penalty that would almost certainly push her evaluation below passing. Or she could spend the next 3 days ranging every target by eye, using her reticle's mil-dot system to calculate distances based on the known dimensions of objects in the compound. A human torso is roughly 18 inches wide. A standard door frame is 32 inches. A technical vehicle with a mounted weapon system is approximately 19 feet long. If she could see it, she could measure it. If she could measure it, she could range it. If she could range it, she could hit it. She settled into her hide and began taking notes. 71 hours later, Claire Harlan emerged from her position undetected and walked into the debrief room with a shooting score that would have been impressive under ideal conditions. Under the conditions she had actually faced, it was nearly impossible. 15 targets engaged. 15 targets hit. Range estimations accurate to within 2 meters across distances spanning 600 to 1,100 yards. Concealment rating: 0 detections across 72 hours of continuous observation. The instructors didn't know about the batteries. They didn't know about the bipod clip or the mislabeled wind card or any of the dozen small obstacles that had been placed in her path over preceding weeks. All they saw was the numbers on the board and the holes in the steel. Claire didn't explain. She didn't have to. Calloway was standing by the door when she exited the debrief. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Harlan, Master Chief, your rangefinder batteries, they work." Claire held his gaze. They worked fine. Something shifted in Calloway's eyes. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. "Good," he said, "because the next block is live fire. No room for equipment failures." The live fire block was everything the previous weeks had been building toward. The facility had a full-scale mock village built into a canyon 3 miles from a main compound. The structures were concrete and plywood, designed to simulate a hostile urban environment, complete with doorways, windows, rooftops, and interconnected alleyways. Civilian role players moved through the streets on randomized patterns. Target designators would illuminate threats for 6-second windows before going dark. The exercise was simple in concept. Move through the village as a 4-man element. Identify and engage hostile targets. Avoid civilian casualties. Extract clean. Simple in concept. Brutal in execution. Claire was assigned to fire Team 2 with Vance, Grant, and Mercer. Calloway would run Overwatch from a high position on the canyon rim, calling targets and evaluating performance. The exercise would run in real time. No resets, no do-overs, no second chances. They stepped off at 0530, moving in a staggered column to the pre-dawn darkness. Claire was third in the stack, rifle up, optic powered, finger index along the receiver. The village was silent, except for the distant sound of generators and the irregular creak of wind to the plywood structures. The first contact came at 0542. Grant, on point, spotted movement in a second-floor window on the east side of the main thoroughfare. He keyed his radio twice, the signal for possible hostile, and held position while Mercer worked the rangefinder. Target east window. Range 320. Wind left to right 4 to 6. Claire was watching the window. The figure inside was moving erratically, stepping in and out of shadow. Through her scope, she could see arms but not hands. She couldn't confirm a weapon. "Hold fire," she said quietly. "Can't confirm hostile." Grant's voice was tight. Designator is about to cycle. We shoot or we miss. Can't confirm hostile. The designator flashed green for 3 seconds, then went dark. The figure in the window stepped back into shadow and disappeared. Civilian. No weapon. Claire had been right. Grant didn't say anything. He also didn't argue when Claire called the next 2 targets before he did. The second contact was different. They were clearing the Western Market District when Calloway's voice crackled through the radio. Fire Team 2, hostile element moving south through the covered alley. 4 targets. Weapons visible. Engage at your discretion. Claire saw them immediately. 4 figures in civilian clothes, each carrying an AK variant slung across a chest. They were moving in a loose formation, heads up, scanning the rooftops. They were 50 meters away and closing fast. The problem was the wind. A crosswind had picked up in the last 3 minutes, rolling down the canyon walls and funneling to the alleyways at unpredictable angles. Claire's normal hold at this distance would be dead on, but the wind was shifting every few seconds, oscillating between a full-value gust and near calm. Vance was reading her thoughts. Wind's inconsistent. Wait for it to settle. It's not going to settle. Then we wait for them to clear the alley and take the shot in the open. Claire shook her head. In 3 seconds, the targets would round a corner and disappear behind a concrete structure. They would emerge on the other side with clear sight lines to the team's position. The ambush would flip. She had to shoot now, but the wind was wrong. And then she felt it, the shift, a moment of absolute stillness between gusts, a pocket of dead air that would last no more than 3 seconds before the next surge rolled down the canyon. It was invisible on the wind flags. It was imperceptible to anyone who wasn't reading the micro movements of dust and fabric and suspended debris with the kind of attention that came only from years of watching things die. Claire moved before Vance could stop her. She broke from cover, dropped to a knee, and pressed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The reports overlapped, echoing through the narrow streets like a single rolling thunder. 3 targets dropped. The 4th spun, weapon rising, and caught Claire's 4th round center mass before he could squeeze the trigger. The silence that followed was absolute. Vance was staring at her. You fired 3 seconds early. Protocol says wait for spotter confirmation. Protocol would have gotten us killed. You don't know that. Claire ejected her magazine and slotted a fresh one. I know the wind, and I know what 4 hostiles with clear sight lines would have done to this team. Behind her, Grant and Mercer exchanged a look. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't even skepticism. It was something closer to recognition. The reluctant acknowledgement that she had seen something they hadn't and that she had been right. Calloway's debrief was brutal. You broke timing protocol, he said, his voice flat and hard. You engaged without spotter confirmation. You exposed your position to potential secondary threats. You took a risk that could have compromised the entire element. Claire stood at attention, eyes forward. Yes, Master Chief. The shot was clean. All 4 targets down. No civilian casualties. No friendly casualties. Calloway paused. You want to tell me why you fired early? Wind window, Master Chief. 3 seconds of dead air between gusts. If I waited for spotter confirmation, the window would have closed. Targets would have reached cover. Engagement would have been on their terms, not ours. You saw a 3-second wind window. Yes, Master Chief. From 50 meters in a crosswind corridor with no ranging equipment deployed. Yes, Master Chief. Calloway studied her for a long moment. His expression revealed nothing. You were right, he said finally. The shot was good. The timing was good. The instinct was good. He leaned forward. But instinct doesn't override protocol. Not in this element. Not on my watch. Protocol keeps men alive. Yes, Master Chief. You break timing again without my authorization. You're off this team. Understood. Understood, Master Chief. Calloway held her gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he nodded once and dismissed her. Claire walked out of the debrief and found Vance waiting by the door. He didn't say anything at first. Just fell in to step beside her as she walked toward the barracks, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on the horizon. That was a hell of a shot, he said finally. Claire didn't slow down. It was a necessary shot. 3 seconds. You called a 3-second wind window from 50 meters. The dust was settling. The fabric on the third target's sleeve stopped moving. The mirage through my scope went flat. It wasn't complicated. Vance shook his head. For you, maybe. They walked in silence for another 30 meters. The sun was climbing over the eastern hills, painting the scrubland in shades of gold and rust. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter was spooling up for the day's first training flight. Calloway's not wrong, Vance said. Protocol exists for a reason. Men have died because someone thought they knew better than the system. Men have also died because someone trusted the system when the system was wrong. That's a dangerous way to think. It's an accurate way to think. Claire stopped walking and turned to face him. I'm not saying protocol doesn't matter. I'm saying protocol is a tool, not a religion. When the tool doesn't fit the situation, you adapt or you die. Vance studied her. Something in his expression had shifted. Not softened, exactly, but opened. Like a door that had been locked was now sitting slightly ajar. You lost someone, he said quietly. Didn't you? Claire's face went still. That's not relevant. It's always relevant. Everyone in this business has lost someone. It changes how you see the world. It changes what you trust. For a long moment, Claire didn't respond. The helicopter in the distance had lifted off, its rotors chopping the morning air into rhythmic pulses. Mosul, she said finally, 3 years ago. Night engagement in an urban corridor. My spotter's name was Ethan Pierce. He was the best wind reader I've ever worked with, before or since. Vance waited. We were set up in a 2-story structure overlooking a target compound. The building was old, crumbling masonry, compromised foundations. We knew the risk, but the position was the only one that gave us clear sight lines to the HVT's movement corridor. She paused. The memory was sharp-edged, precise. She had trained herself not to feel it, only to see it. The HVT moved at 0240. We engaged. Clean shot, clean kill. And then the wall came down. Structural failure? The building had been rigged. Not with explosives, with deliberate cuts in the load-bearing walls. The shot triggered a collapse sequence. The entire south face came down in less than 4 seconds. Pierce, buried under 6 feet of rubble. I was against the north wall when it happened. The collapse created a void, a triangular space between 2 fallen beams and a section of intact flooring. I survived because the void held. Vance's expression was unreadable. How did you find the void? Claire met his eyes. I felt the air moving, the draft against my cheek. Air doesn't move through solid rubble. It moves through gaps, through flaws in the structure. I followed the draft, found the void, and crawled out. Pierce didn't have the same luck. Silence settled between them. That's why you see things other people don't, Vance said slowly. That's why you read wind patterns and structural flaws and micro shifts in the environment, because you learn that the world isn't solid. It's full of gaps, and if you can find the gaps, you can survive. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The weeks that followed were different, not dramatically different. The test continued. The challenges persisted. The wall of silence around Claire remained intact, but something had shifted in the texture of the team's resistance. The sabotage stopped. The worst positions were distributed more evenly. The crude jokes that died whenever she entered a room began, tentatively, to continue in her presence. It wasn't acceptance. It was something more grudging and more honest. The recognition that she had earned her place by the same metrics they respected in each other. The holes on the steel and the numbers on the board didn't care about chromosomes. And in a world where performance was the only currency that mattered, Claire's account was fully funded. Calloway remained distant, evaluating more than engaging. He watched her on the range. He observed her during tactical briefings. He noted how she moved through the facility's blind spots, how she positioned herself in rooms, how she read the body language of men who had spent years learning to hide their intentions. He also noted how she never complained, never explained, never demanded accommodation or acknowledgement. She simply performed, and that in Calloway's world was worth more than any speech or credential or bureaucratic endorsement. The mission brief came on a Thursday. The team assembled in the classified briefing room at 0600. The room was sparse. Concrete walls, folding chairs, a digital projector connected to a secure terminal. Calloway stood at the front, flanked by two intelligence officers in unmarked uniforms. "Gentlemen," Calloway said, then paused and glanced at Claire. "And lady, we've been tasked with a time-sensitive interdiction operation. High-value target, complex terrain, minimal support infrastructure." The projector displayed a satellite image of mountain range, jagged peaks, snow-covered ridgelines, deep valleys choked with shadow. Location is a remote border valley, approximately 70 clicks inside denied territory. The target is a weapons convoy, surface-to-air missiles being transported to a non-state actor hostile to U.S. interests. The convoy will transit through a narrow mountain pass between 0200 and 0400 hours. 3 days from now, our job is to stop it. Calloway clicked to the next slide. A topographical map appeared, showing the pass in detail. A winding road carved into mountainside, flanked by steep cliffs on one side and a sheer drop on the other. We'll insert via Halo at 2200 2 days from now. Landing zone is here. He pointed to a relatively flat area approximately 3 clicks from the pass, on a glacial shelf at 11,000 feet. From there, we move on foot to overwatch positions along the pass. Engagement window is narrow. Once the convoy enters a kill zone, we have approximately 90 seconds to neutralize the lead and trail vehicles before they can disperse or call for reinforcement. Miles Grant raised a hand. "What's our extract plan?" "Primary extract is a Hello pickup at landing zone Bravo here." Calloway indicated a position 6 clicks south of pass. Time for 0600 on D+1. Backup extract is an overland movement to a secondary pickup point 12 clicks further south. If both extract options are compromised, we proceed to the border and make contact with regional assets. Claire studied the topographical map. The terrain was brutal. Steep gradients, minimal cover, multiple dead-end valleys that could become traps if the team was caught in the open. But something else caught her attention. "Master Chief," she said, "what's the intelligence assessment on enemy patrol patterns in the area?" Calloway nodded to one of the intelligence officers, who clicked to a new slide. "Based on satellite imagery and signals intercept, we assess minimal enemy presence in the immediate target area. The convoy itself will have security elements. Estimated squad strength, approximately 8 to 12 armed personnel, but no fixed defensive positions have been identified along the route. What about the approach to our overwatch positions?" The intelligence officer hesitated. "The approach is assessed as low risk. The terrain is difficult but passable. No enemy activity has been detected in the last 72 hours. Claire looked at the map again. The approach route to the overwatch positions crossed a series of ridgelines and shallow valleys, some of which were obscured by the angle of satellite coverage. There were blind spots, areas where a small force could move without being detected from above. "What's the snow cover like on the northern ridge?" she asked. The intelligence officer checked his notes. "Heavy accumulation. Recent storms have deposited approximately 3 feet of fresh powder in the higher elevations." Claire filed the information away. Fresh snow was both an asset and a liability. It provided visual concealment and acoustic dampening, but it also recorded every movement. A disturbed snow line could reveal patrol route hours after patrol had passed. Calloway was watching her. "Something on your mind, Harlan?" "No, Master Chief. Just getting a feel for the terrain." Calloway held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Because once we're on the ground, there's no room for surprises. We execute the plan, we hit the convoy, we extract clean. Questions?" The room was silent. "Outstanding. Gear check at 1400. Final brief at 1800. Dismissed." The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation. Claire checked her rifle 3 times. Bolt, barrel, trigger assembly, scope zeroing. She verified her cold bore data at multiple temperature ranges, accounting for the extreme altitude and thin air that would affect both velocity and trajectory. She packed and repacked her kit, weighing every item against the brutal reality of a high-altitude movement in sub-zero conditions. Vance found her in the armory the night before departure. "You've been quiet," he said. Claire didn't look up from the scope. She was cleaning. I'm always quiet. Quieter than usual. He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. Something bothering you about this op? Just running scenarios. What kind of scenarios? Claire set down the cleaning cloth and met his eyes. The approach route, the one they're telling us is low risk. What about it? It crosses 3 ridge lines that aren't fully covered by satellite, and the northern ridge has fresh snow, 3 feet of it. If anyone's been moving through that area, we won't know until we're on top of them. Vance considered this. Intel says no activity in 72 hours. Intel said the building in Mosul was structurally sound. Claire's voice was flat. Intel is only as good as the coverage, and the coverage has gaps. You think we're walking into something? I think I don't like blind spots. And I think that northern ridge is one big blind spot. Vance was quiet for a moment. You gonna raise it with Calloway? Claire shook her head. I raised in the brief. He heard me, and he made his decision. But you think he's wrong. I think he's trusting the system. The same system that tells him protocol keeps men alive. She picked up her cleaning cloth and resumed working on the scope. I hope he's right. The insertion went according to plan. The C-130 climbed to 30,000 feet over international airspace, then banked hard to the east, crossing into denied territory under the cover of darkness. At 2200, the ramp dropped and the team stepped into the void. Claire had made dozens of halo jumps, but this one was different. The air at 30,000 feet was minus 40 degrees, thin enough to star the lungs even to the oxygen mask. The ground below was invisible, just an endless expanse of black punctuated by the faint silver gleam of snow under a quarter moon. She fell for 2 minutes, watching the altimeter on her wrist tick down to the thousands. At 5,000 feet, she pulled the ripcord and felt the violent jerk of the chute deploying. The harness dug into her shoulders and thighs as her descent slowed to a controlled glide. The landing zone materialized out of the darkness. A broad glacial shelf, flat and white, bordered by jagged rock formations. Claire flared her chute at the last moment, absorbing the impact with bent knees and rolling to dissipate the energy. She was on her feet in seconds, collapsing the canopy and scanning the perimeter for threats. The rest of the team landed in sequence. Calloway first, then Vance, then Grant Mercer, and finally Jack Rohr, the team's junior shooter. They consolidated in silence, burying their chutes and checking equipment. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Calloway signaled a move with a closed fist, then pointed toward the northeast. The team fell into formation and began the long march toward the overwatch positions. The movement was brutal. The altitude hit Claire within the first kilometer. Each breath felt like drinking through a straw, and the cold was a living thing, creeping through the seams of her gear and settling into her bones. The snow was thigh-deep in places, forcing them to break trail in rotation, each man taking point for 10 minutes before falling back to recover. By 0100, they had covered 4 of the 7 kilometers to the first overwatch position. The terrain had funneled them into a narrow valley, bordered on one side by a sheer cliff face and on the other by a steep slope that rose toward a northern ridge. Claire kept her eyes on that ridge. The snow cover was undisturbed. At least, it appeared undisturbed from this angle. But something about the way the drifts were piled against the rock outcrops bothered her. The pattern was wrong. Too uniform. Too deliberate. She keyed her radio. Overwatch, this is Element. Holding position for terrain assessment. Calloway's voice came back immediately. Element, Overwatch. Negative on the hold. We're behind schedule. Continue movement. Claire hesitated. Overwatch, I'm seeing anomalies on the northern ridge. Request permission to investigate. Element, what kind of anomalies? Snow distribution. Doesn't match natural drift patterns. Could be foot traffic. There was a pause. Then, Element, Intel shows no activity in this sector. Continue movement. We're losing moonlight. Claire looked at Vance. His face was unreadable behind the balaclava, but she could see the question in his eyes. She keyed the radio one more time. Overwatch, recommending alternate route via southern approach. Longer but avoids potential compromise. The response was immediate and final. Element, negative on alternate route. Continue on planned approach. That's an order. Claire released the radio key. The northern ridge loomed above them, silent and white and full of things she couldn't see. Copy, Overwatch, she said quietly. Continuing movement. They reached the first Overwatch position at 0230. Claire helped Vance establish their hide on a rocky shelf overlooking the western approach to the pass. The position was marginal, limited concealment, exposed to the wind, no natural cover for retreat if things went wrong. But it offered clear sight lines to the kill zone, and in the end, that was what mattered. She set up her rifle on the tripod, checked the cold board data one more time, and began ranging the key points along the convoy route. The pass was narrow here, barely wide enough for two vehicles to pass side by side. The lead vehicle would enter her engagement window at approximately 100 meters, giving her a clean shot through the windshield. If she missed, the driver would have maybe 4 seconds to react before Grant's position took over. She wouldn't miss. The weight was the hardest part. The cold seeped through her layers, numbing her fingers and toes despite the chemical warmers she had packed into her gloves and boots. The wind picked up around 0300, driving fine powder across the exposed rock and reducing visibility to 50 meters. And still she watched. The road, the pass, the northern ridge. The convoy appeared at 0347. Claire saw the headlights first. 2 pinpricks of yellow against the blue-black mountain, moving slowly along the winding road. She keyed her radio. Contact. 2 vehicles moving east through the pass. Range the lead vehicle, 1500 in closing. Calloway's voice was calm. Copy contact. All elements. Weapons free on my command. Await target designation. The convoy crept closer. Claire tracked the lead vehicle through her scope, adjusting her hold for wind and elevation. The crosshairs settled on the driver's side of the windshield. Center mass. Clean kill. Lead vehicle entering kill zone in 30 seconds. Mercer reported from his position on the eastern ridge. Copy. All elements stand by. 20 seconds. The wind died to a whisper. The snow stopped drifting. Everything went still. Lead vehicle in kill zone. Execute, execute, execute. Claire squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the windshield spiderweb, saw the driver slump, saw the vehicle lurch to the right and grind to a halt against the cliff face. A heartbeat later, Grant's round punched through the trailing vehicle's engine block. Steam erupted from the hood. Doors flew open. Men spilled onto the road. And then everything went wrong. The first RPG came from the northern ridge. Claire saw the smoke trail a split second before impact. A streak of fire arcing down from the high ground, slamming into the rock face 10 meters below Mercer's position. The explosion lit up the night, showering the slope with debris. Contact north. Contact north. Mercer's voice was ragged with adrenaline. Multiple hostiles. Northern ridge. 200 meters. Claire spun her rifle toward the ridgeline. Through her scope, she saw them. Figures in white camouflage, moving through the snow drift she had flagged 6 hours earlier. They weren't convoy security. They were a flanking element, positioned hours before the team arrived, waiting for exactly this moment. The trap was perfect. All elements, break contact. Calloway's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back to secondary positions. Move. Claire fired twice into the northern ridge, dropping one figure and forcing another into cover. Then she was on her feet, collapsing the tripod, slinging her rifle and sprinting through the snow toward the rally point. The world became a blur of motion and sound. Gunfire crackled from multiple directions. The enemy on the ridge, the convoy survivors on the road, and somewhere behind her, the steady bark of Grant's rifle covering the retreat. Claire vaulted over a rock outcrop, slid down a steep slope, and found herself in a narrow gully choked with boulders and frozen brush. Vance was already there, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. This way, Calloway's 200 meters south. They ran. The gully emptied into a wider valley, bordered on 3 sides by sheer cliffs. Claire recognized it immediately. A dead end, a trap within a trap. Calloway was kneeling behind a pile of rubble, his rifle trained on the northern approach. Mercer was beside him, reloading. Grant came sliding down the slope a moment later. half-dragging Jack Roar, whose left eye was soaked with blood. Roar's hit, Grant gasped. Through and through, missed the artery, but he's losing blood fast. Get it behind cover. Calloway's voice was steady, but Claire could see the calculation in his eyes. The grim arithmetic of ammunition versus threats versus time. Mercer, get on the radio. I need QRS status. Mercer keyed his handset. Static. He tried again, adjusting the antenna. More static. Comms are degraded, he reported. Terrain's interfering with the signal. I'm getting fragments, but nothing clean. Keep trying. Claire scanned the perimeter. The cliffs formed a natural amphitheater, open only to the north where they had entered. The enemy would funnel through that opening, using the terrain to mask their approach. Once they reached the ridgeline above the valley, they would have clear sight lines to every position. She counted rounds. For magazines between 6 operators. Maybe 60 shots if they were careful. Not enough. Her eyes moved to the cliffs. Solid rock. No cover, no concealment, no way out. And then she saw it. The wall behind Calloway wasn't solid. To anyone else, it looked like a seamless expanse of stone, ancient masonry from a collapsed structure, mortared together by centuries of frost and pressure. But Claire saw what they didn't. A crack, a gap, a flaw in the pattern where 2 blocks had shifted apart, leaving a void that extended deeper than the eye could follow. She moved closer, her hand brushing the stone. Cold air moved against her fingers. Draft. Air was flowing through the gap, which meant the gap led somewhere. Master Chief. Calloway didn't turn. Not now, Harlan. Sir, there's an exit. That got his attention. He spun, rifle still raised, and followed her gaze to the wall. That's solid rock. It's not. Claire pressed her palm flat against the gap. Feel the air. There's a void behind this wall. Probably a collapsed structure from the old outpost. If we can widen the gap, we can get through. Calloway stared at her. The gunfire on the northern ridge was getting closer. They had maybe 3 minutes before the enemy reached the high ground. How do you know there's a way out on the other side? I don't, Claire admitted. But I know the draft is coming from somewhere, and that means there's an opening. It's our only shot. The calculus flashed across Calloway's face. Stay and fight with 60 rounds against an unknown force. Or trust a woman's instinct about a gap in a wall that might lead to nothing. He made his decision in 2 seconds. Grant, Mercer, start widening that gap. Vance, help me with Roar. Harlan, he met her eyes. You're covering our rear. Buy us time. Claire dropped to a knee at the mouth of the gully and sighted down the northern approach. The enemy was moving in a disciplined spread. For figures visible through the drifting snow, 2 more shadows behind them. They were good. Not Spec Ops good, but trained. Militia, maybe, or foreign advisors. Either way, they knew what they were doing. She controlled her breathing. Inhale, exhale, hold. The lead figure was 300 meters out, moving from rock to rock. In 5 seconds, he would reach a position with clear sight lines into the valley. Claire tracked him through her scope, calculating wind and drop and timing. She fired. The figure dropped without a sound. The others dove for cover. Their advance halted. Claire shifted to the second figure, waited for movement, and fired again. Miss. Too much wind. She adjusted and fired a 3rd time. Hit. 2 down. Behind her, she could hear the scrape of stone as Grant and Mercer worked on the wall. The gap was widening, but slowly. Too slowly. Harlan, we need more time. Calloway shouted. Working on it. A burst of automatic fire stitched the rocks to her left. Claire rolled, found new cover, and returned fire. 3 more rounds. 2 more hits. The enemy was learning, staying lower, moving slower, using the terrain. She ejected her magazine. Half empty. Maybe 12 rounds left. Gaps open. Mercer's voice. It's tight, but it goes through. Claire fired twice more, forcing the enemy back into cover, then turned and sprinted for the wall. The gap was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. Beyond it, Claire could see nothing, just darkness and the promise of more stone. Calloway went first, disappearing into the void. Then Mercer, dragging Roar. Then Grant and Vance. Claire was last. She paused at the entrance, looking back at the northern approach. The enemy was regrouping, preparing for a final push. They would reach the wall in less than 60 seconds. Claire raised her rifle and fired 3 times, measured shots, spaced 2 seconds apart, timed to the rhythm of the enemy's movement. Each shot found a target. Each target went down. Then she turned and slipped through the gap, leaving the valley behind. The void was exactly what Claire had hoped. A collapsed structure, stone and timber, creating a network of tunnels through the rubble. The air was cold and stale, tinged with the smell of ancient dust. But it was moving, still moving. "Follow the draft," Claire said. "It'll lead us out." They moved in single file, Calloway on point, Claire bringing up the rear. The tunnel twisted and branched, forcing the squeeze through narrow gaps and climb over fallen beams. Roar was fading. Claire could hear his labored breathing, the wet sound of blood loss taking its toll. After 200 meters, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Claire felt the draft strengthen, pulling toward a gap in the far wall. "There," she pointed. "That's our exit." Calloway moved to the gap and looked through. Claire saw his shoulders relax. "Gully," he reported, "opens onto a rock shelf with good cover. We can hold there until extract." They pushed through. The rock shelf was defensible, a natural fortress of stone overlooking a steep slope. The enemy would have to climb 500 meters of exposed terrain to reach them, and by then, dawn would be breaking. Mercer was back on the radio, adjusting the antenna for the new terrain. After 30 seconds, his face changed. "Contact," he said. "QRF is inbound. ETA 45 minutes. The relief that washed through the team was palpable. Grant leaned back against a rock and closed his eyes. Mercer applied fresh pressure to Roar's wound. Vance sat down heavily, his hands trembling for the first time. Claire remained standing, watching the approach. Calloway walked over and stood beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You saw the disturbed snow," he said finally, "on the northern ridge. You flagged it in the brief." "Yes, Master Chief." "I dismissed it." Claire said nothing. That was a mistake. Calloway's voice was quiet but steady. A mistake that almost cost this team. "You were right, and I didn't listen." Claire met his eyes. "Protocol said to trust the intelligence assessment." "Protocol." Calloway's jaw tightened. "Protocol says a lot of things. Protocol doesn't read disturbed snow patterns. Protocol doesn't feel drafts through collapsed walls. Protocol doesn't fire 3 seconds early to catch a wind window that nobody else saw." He turned to face her fully. "You broke protocol when it needed to be broken. You saw what the rest of us missed. You found an exit that nobody else would have found." He paused. "And you covered our withdrawal with 3 shots that saved at least 2 lives. I did what was necessary, Master Chief. You did what was right." Calloway nodded once. The same nod he had given her after the rangefinder incident, but different now, deeper, more certain. And that matters. The QRF arrived at 0530, 2 MH-60 Black Hawks, sweeping in low over the ridgeline. The rotor wash kicked up a storm of snow as the first bird touched down, and then the team was moving. Grant and Mercer carrying Roar between them, Vance limping on a twisted ankle he hadn't mentioned until now. Claire was the last one aboard. She paused at the door of the helicopter. Looking back at the rock shelf, the gully, the distant outline of the collapsed wall that had saved their lives. The sun was just beginning to crest the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere behind those peaks, the enemy was probably still searching for them, still trying to understand how 6 snipers had disappeared into a solid wall. She hoped they never figured it out. "Harlan," Calloway's voice, "were wheels up in 30. Claire turned and climbed aboard. The helicopter lifted off, banking hard to the south, and the mountain fell away beneath them. The debrief took 3 days. Intelligence officers picked apart every moment of the operation. The insertion, the approach, the ambush, the escape. They mapped the enemy's movements, analyzed their tactics, and tried to understand how a flanking element had been positioned without detection. The answer, when it came, was both obvious and infuriating. The enemy had moved into position during a 23-hour gap in satellite coverage caused by an orbital adjustment. They had approached from the west, using a route that avoided the monitored sectors, and had settled into their positions hours before the team arrived. Claire had been right. The northern ridge was a blind spot, and the disturbed snow she had flagged had been real. Nobody apologized. Nobody had to. The numbers spoke for themselves. 6 operators deployed. 6 operators returned. 1 wounded, none killed. Target convoy destroyed. Mission accomplished. But the mission report included a single line that hadn't appeared in any previous debrief. Recommendation. Operator Harlan's tactical awareness and structural instinct contributed directly to element survival during extraction. Request consideration for advanced reconnaissance certification. Calloway had signed it. The team returned to the training facility a week after the mission. Claire expected things to return to normal. The silence, the careful distance, the culture withheld trust that had defined her first months in element. She was wrong. The change was subtle at first. Grant, who had barely acknowledged her existence before, started including her in pre-mission equipment checks. Mercer, who had always found somewhere else to look, began making eye contact during briefings. Vance, who had spotted for her without comment, started sharing his wind reading notes before she asked. The crude jokes that had always died in her presence began to continue. Not crude jokes about her. The men had never been that stupid, but the normal, profane banter that defined life in a special operations unit. The banter that said, "Without words, you're one of us now." One afternoon, Claire was cleaning her rifle in the armory when a new operator walked in, a transfer from another element, fresh from sniper school, still carrying the arrogance of a man who had never failed at anything. He looked at Claire, looked at the rifle in her hands, and said something she didn't quite catch. But she caught the tone, the dismissal, the assumption. Before she could respond, a voice cut across the room. Harlan saved 6 lives on a mountain last month. It was Grant, standing in the doorway, his expression flat and hard, including mine. Whatever you're about to say, don't. The new operator's mouth closed. He looked at Grant, then at Claire, then at the rifle in her hands. Whatever he saw there made him reconsider. "Copy that," he said quietly and left. Grant walked over to Claire's workbench and set down a small canvas bag. Inside were 2 spare batteries, the high-capacity kind, rated for extreme cold. "Figured you might need extras," he said, "for the rangefinder." Claire looked at the batteries, looked at Grant, understood. "Thanks," she said. Grant nodded once and walked out. The team's rhythm changed after that. Claire was included in pre-briefs without needing to demand it. Her wind readings were trusted without confirmation. Her instincts were consulted quietly on terrain assessment and structural evaluation. She wasn't treated differently because she was a woman. She was treated the same because she had earned it. The bar had always been clear: perform or leave. But Claire had done more than perform. She had exceeded the bar, and then she had saved the men who had set it. That changed everything. 3 months after the mountain mission, Calloway assembled a team for a routine briefing. The mission was straightforward: a reconnaissance operation in a coastal region, minimal risk, standard operating procedure. But before he dismissed them, Calloway cleared his throat. "One more thing." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each operator in turn. "Harlan is being assigned to permanent element status, effective immediately. Anyone has a problem with that, speak now." The room was silent. Calloway nodded. "Outstanding." Dismissed. Claire remained seated as the others filed out. When the room was empty, Calloway walked over and sat down across from her. "You've earned this," he said simply. "I know. You don't seem surprised." Claire met his eyes. "I stopped being surprised a long time ago, Master Chief. I stopped expecting to be accepted, and I stopped needing to be. I just did the work." Calloway studied her for a moment. Then, for the first time since she had known him, he smiled. "That's exactly why you're here," he said. "Because you're the kind of operator who does the work regardless of who's watching, who reads the field when everyone else is reading the map, who finds the exit when there isn't supposed to be one." He stood and extended his hand. Claire took it. "Welcome to the team, Harlan. For real this time." That night, Claire walked out to the range alone. The facility was quiet. Most of the operators were in the chow hall or the barracks, winding down from the day's training. But Claire had never been comfortable with stillness. She needed to move, to shoot, to feel the rifle against her shoulder and the wind against her face. She set up on 1,000-yard line, facing the long row of steel silhouettes that stretched across the moonlit landscape. No spotter, no range card, just her rifle, her scope, and the years of training that had brought her to this moment. She fired her first round. The steel rang in the distance. She fired again, and again, and again. By the time she finished, she had put 20 rounds down range, all within a 6-inch circle at 1,000 yards. In the dark, without assistance, she was packing up her kit when she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. Vance. He walked over and stood beside her, looking out at the silhouettes. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Never can. Not after." Vance nodded. He understood. Every operator understood. The way the body stayed wired for days after a mission, the way the adrenaline lingered in the blood, like a poison that wouldn't clear. "I wanted to say something," he said after a moment, "about what happened on the mountain." "You don't have to." "I do." He turned to face her. "When you told me about Mosul, about Pierce, about the void, I didn't understand. I thought it was trauma. I thought you were seeing ghosts in every wall." Claire waited. "I was wrong." Vance's voice was quiet. "What you see isn't ghosts. It's reality. The way things actually are, underneath all the assumptions we make about solid ground and safe approaches and intel assessments. You see the gaps, the flaws, the paths that aren't on any map. Everyone sees differently," Claire said. "I just see what I was taught to see." "No." Vance shook his head. "You taught yourself. You learned it alone in a pile of rubble, when the only thing keeping you alive was your ability to read the air. That's not training. That's survival." Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. "I'm glad you're on the team," Vance said finally. "For real. Not just because Calloway says so. Because I've worked with a lot of operators, and most of them are good, but you're different. You're the kind of person who saves lives. Not by following the rules, but by understanding when the rules aren't enough." He turned and walked back toward the barracks. Claire watched him go. Then she shouldered her rifle and followed. The months that followed were operational. The team deployed 4 times: coastal reconnaissance, mountain interdiction, urban direct action, desert overwatch. Each mission was different. Each mission tested them in new ways. And each time, Claire was there, reading the wind, reading the terrain, reading the spaces between things that others couldn't see. She didn't speak much. She never had. But her silence was different now. Not the silence of exclusion, but the silence of integration. The quiet confidence of someone who belonged. Calloway noticed. Grant noticed. Vance noticed. The team noticed. And one by one, the walls that had surrounded Claire Harlan began to fall. The final proof came on a winter night, 6 months after the mountain. The team was running a training exercise in the pine forest east of the facility, a simulated hostage rescue with live fire and role players. Claire was embedded with the assault element, providing precision cover from a high position 200 meters from the target structure. The exercise went wrong. A role player strayed into a restricted zone. A blank round misfired, and in the chaos that followed, a real shooter emerged from the tree line, not part of the exercise, not part of the plan, not part of anything anyone had anticipated. Claire saw him before anyone else did. She read the way he moved, too purposeful, too focused, too intent on the target structure where the team was stacking up for entry. She read the shape under his jacket, the bulge that didn't match the role player profiles. She read the way his eyes swept the perimeter, searching for threats, calculating angles. She raised her rifle. Contact left. Real contact. Weapon under jacket. The team reacted instantly, years of training compressing into a single coordinated response. Grant and Mercer broke right. Vance went low. Calloway dropped to a knee and acquired the target. But Claire was already firing. Her first round hit the man's shoulder, spinning him. Her second hit his chest, dropping him. Her third, unnecessary but certain, ensured he wouldn't get up. The man was an intruder, armed, unaffiliated. His motivations died with him on the forest floor. The after-action review was brief. An intruder had penetrated the facility's perimeter during a live-fire exercise. He had been armed with concealed handgun, an intent unknown. Operator Claire Harlan had identified the threat and neutralized it before it could engage the assault element. Casualties, 0. Team members saved, 5. Calloway read the report aloud, then set it down. Anyone want to add anything? Grant spoke first. Harlan called the contact before I even saw movement. By the time I had my weapon up, she was already firing. Same, Mercer said. Didn't even register until the first shot. Vance nodded. She read it, the way she reads everything. Before anyone else even knew something was wrong. Calloway looked at Claire. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed, not softened, but opened, widened, made room for something that hadn't been there before. Harlan, he said, you saw something we didn't. Again, you acted on it. Again. And because of that, 5 men are alive who might not be. Claire held his gaze. Just doing the job, Master Chief. No. Calloway shook his head. You're doing more than the job. You're doing what the job is supposed to be about. Protecting your team when nobody else can see the threat. He stood. This team has operated for 14 years. We've lost men. We've failed missions. We've made mistakes. But we've never, he paused, we've never had an operator who sees the way you see, who reads the way you read, who finds exits that don't exist on any map. He walked around the table and stopped in front of her. You're not an attachment anymore, Harlan. You're not a test case or an experiment or a checkbox on someone's diversity initiative. You're a sniper. You're an operator. You're part of this team in every way that matters. He extended his hand. Claire took it. Thank you, Master Chief. Calloway's grip was firm. His eyes held hers. No, he said. Thank you. Claire walked out of the briefing room into the cold night air. The stars were out, sharp and clear, scattered across the sky like bullet holes in black silk. The wind was still, the kind of stillness that preceded change, the kind she had learned to read on 1,000 battlefields. Vance was waiting by the door. Hell of a day, he said. Hell of a year. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars. You ever think about what would have happened? Vance asked. If you hadn't found that gap in the wall, on the mountain? Claire considered the question. Every day. And I remember what I learned in Mosul. Walls are never solid. There's always a gap. You just have to find it. Vance nodded slowly. And you always do. Not always. Claire's voice was quiet. But enough. She turned and walked toward the barracks. Behind her, the stars wheeled slowly in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of soldiers and snipers and women who had learned to survive by reading the spaces between things. Tomorrow there would be more training, more missions, more walls to find gaps in. But tonight, Claire Harlan was exactly where she belonged, and the silence that surrounded her was no longer a weapon. It was respect. The team deployed again 3 weeks later, and again after that, and again. Each mission was different, but one thing remained constant. Claire was there, rifle steady, eyes sharp, reading the wind and the terrain and the invisible architecture of danger that surrounded every operation. She never sought recognition. She never demanded accommodation. She never explained herself to anyone who didn't need to know. She just did the work. Day after day, mission after mission, shot after shot. And when the stories were told later, in barracks and briefing rooms, in quiet conversations between operators who had seen the worst and survived, her name was always there. The only woman in the sniper element, the one who saved them all,